Several years ago, when I started realizing I couldn't see as well, went to the eye doctor and needed glasses, but I didn't have to wear them all the time. I can't remember then what I was supposed to wear them for, but I had glasses for a bit, and then I thought I don't really like glasses so much, and so contacts would be a great option, and so I went and got fitted for contacts, but I knew it was going to be a problem because I don't like putting my finger in my eyeball. That just didn't sound appealing to me. And Lisa had contacts. I would watch her do that, and I'd think, man, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do that. But I went for it because I didn't want the glasses. I wanted to wear contacts, and this was before there was LASIK or any other options. And so there I was. I had the contacts. And I could not get the courage to get the contact in my eye. And so the idea we came up with was, well, Lisa can get it in her eyes, so surely she can get my contacts in my eyes. And so I vividly remember in Pensacola, Florida, being pinned against the wall, and she's got this eye open, and she's sticking her finger, and I'm thinking, oh, man. And we did that for a few days and figured out that's probably not fair to her to have to do that. It's probably not great for our marriage in the long run. And so I gave up on the contacts and went back to glasses for a while. And then we had our boys, and I thought, I really don't want to have glasses with them. I want to be able to horse around and not have to worry about it. And finally I figured out how to get the courage to stick my finger in my own eyeball and get the contacts in there. I share that with you because I think it's sometimes hard to switch lenses, even though what we're switching to would be better for us. It's sometimes difficult to switch into the right lens, and sometimes we just like staying where we are. It's more comfortable, it's a little bit easier. We've been talking about lenses over these last few weeks, and we're thinking about lens as a metaphor for what worldview is, the way we see the world. All of us have a worldview. We all have a lens through which we look at reality. And we believe that the right lens, the correct lens that will help us see the most clear and to actually live the reality that is God's reality is God Himself from the Scriptures. And what we've tried to do over these few weeks is to lay out a way to be helpful for us to understand our own worldview, the lens we look through, to know when we've drifted off maybe into another one and switched lenses the wrong way. And then it might be that we need to switch back into that God lens, that biblical lens, so that we're moving and walking in the way that God would have us to do so. We've talked about the Bible being true and trustworthy. We've talked about different attributes of God. And as I've had different conversations with people, I think this is resonating with a number of people. And then others, maybe it's not quite resonating yet. And maybe it won't. I don't know. This is one way that we believe it can be helpful. And then my hope would be, as God's speaking to you in it, that you would use this in a way that works for you. Some of what we're talking about are just tools or ways to talk about something inside of our culture and to even understand our own thinking. If I could say this to you, though, like some people think it's odd that we keep going back to creation, to the garden, for our beginning point of why things are what they are. But what I would say to you today is, if we don't go back there, what we're saying today makes no sense. All we're doing is jumping in just like the culture and giving soundbite answers to the problems and things that are going on in our world. And typically, soundbite responses are not that helpful. They're not helpful from any direction, minus context. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, there is a context, a whole story of God from the beginning of the Scriptures to the end that helps us talk about any topic. And while we've talked about a number of things to this point, I feel like I've given you the framework and the grid to work through. And now we're just thinking more practically about how do we actually work with it. And again, God will work with you in different ways, but I hope you're at least catching the big idea. Here's the other thing that I would ask. I hate it when people are speaking and they ask me to raise my hand and I'm sitting out there. And so at 8 a.m., I had them raise their hand. At 9:15, I abandoned it again. I always think it's a bad idea when I do it, but I'll sometimes do it anyway. I can't help myself because I think it's a good idea in the moment, and then it's not a good idea. But so let me just kind of ask you this. If you can just internally raise your hand. How many of you have taken what we've talked about and actually had a real conversation with someone about these 5 questions in a funnel that help us understand worldview and our lens, and talk about God's story and how we would answer that question? There, I gave you time to internally do it. Now here's the ding against us in the West. And by West, I mean the whole U.S., the East being across the pond and further. We tend to be more information-based than obedience-based in our following of Jesus, which is sort of a big miss because it's all about being obedient to Him and to bringing honor to Him in that obedience as He reveals things to us in His Word. It's a big miss for us if we're just taking in information in these weeks and not somehow having an impact on the sphere of influence that God has given us. He's given every person in the room and online a sphere of influence to impact. And people are hungry and desperate and exhausted today by what they're getting that isn't truth. And we have truth that can take care of the exhaustion and actually bring the satisfaction and pleasure and freedom people are searching for. Could I just cheer you on this week with what we do here today to practice it with the person that's closest to you? Whoever it just be easy with. It doesn't have to be the stranger. It doesn't have to be the person that's out here. Somebody just shared with me on their way out. They had a conversation last night with people in their neighborhood, and they couldn't believe the way people answered the questions. They thought they knew the people well. Why wouldn't we want to have the most substantive conversations with people and understand what they're really thinking and where they really are? And we have something to offer. And you say, well, I don't know that I would know what to say. That's okay. It's what will make your faith stronger, because you'll go back into your life group or somewhere else and say, hey, I tried this and I had no idea how I was supposed to respond. I don't know is okay. It's how we grow and learn when we go dig after that. All right? God, just cheer us on that way. Philippians 4:8. If you'll anchor, we're going to anchor ourselves in Philippians 4:8 today. And I want us to think about it'll actually be a bit before we get to it. We're going to travel some in the scriptures today. But I want us to anchor there as the lens for us to think about our topic today. So I want us to apply the framework and the grid we've been doing on the realm of social media and entertainment. And what I've titled this message is Beauty and Excellence in Social Media and Entertainment. This is not a day where we're going to hammer social media and entertainment. I believe there's beauty and excellence in it. And we want to see how to find that when we look through a God lens at what that can actually be. I was at the gym early this morning. It was still dark, actually, today compared to last Sunday. And I saw a guy, and I invited him, and he said, what are you talking about? And I said, beauty and excellence in social media and entertainment. He goes, oh. God is a God of beauty and excellence, and it can be found in a number of ways. So I want us to think about that. But here's what I want to try first. Successfully, unsuccessfully, I have no idea. I just want to give it a shot. Can we go through God's story in the different circles, or think of it as chapters of God's story, and apply the way we would think about entertainment and social media? And here's how I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think about with our mind and being made in the image of God. Because everything that goes into our mind shapes us. Somebody said it, how'd they say it? Whatever the bucket, I'm going to say this all wrong, but You put a bucket down in a well, and wherever you put that bucket, whatever's down there, that's what's coming up. Whatever it is we put in our mind, that's what's going to come out. And so we want to think about the image of God in our mind in regard to social media and entertainment and how we actually find beauty and excellence in it. When we think about the story, God is at the center of the story. And I've mentioned multiple times, I want to say it again, we have to define who God is. Because when we're talking to somebody else or in our own understanding, sometimes we're talking about two different things. And so we've taken great care the last few weeks to talk about who God is. And I recognize that it's awkward to talk about this in a conversation. It's not natural the way we would talk about it. But I'm telling you, the whole conversation changes if you talk about first who God is, or at least bring that to bear somewhere in the conversation. And God is a sovereign God, meaning that He's in charge, He's in control. So it's not like we're in this vacuum of coming up with what we think and what we don't think. It's God is sovereign. He's the one in charge. He's the one that's making it known. And God is unchanging. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His purposes, His plans, His ways, they're unchanging. He's solid ground. And He's holy, meaning that He's pure. He's unmixed with no evil. So when we think about things, we think about how does that holiness of God come to bear on every part of my life if God is at the center. And He's truth. Jesus said He's the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is a person, and He's love. And love by definition, when we talk about God, is not typically how the culture is speaking of love. This is the kind of love that is self-giving. It gives itself away. Most of the love described in our culture today takes. It takes. It doesn't give itself away. God is a God of love. That's who He is. He's a God who gives Himself away, and it's consistent with His whole character. When I think about who God is, and I think about entertainment, social media, and that kind of thing, I can find beauty and excellence when I think about who He is. And I look for things that are like Him in it. Well, in God's story, there's a first chapter, if you will, and it's creation. And it's in the first part of the Bible. And in Genesis 1:27, we see that God created us in the image of God, and He made us male and female in His image. And so God's very descriptive and distinct in the way He's made us. When He makes us in His image, He gives us the mind that would be in His image also. So in that first part of God's story, our mind, the mind of the first two people, and when God created all of it, it was perfect. Perfect in thinking, perfect in the environment which it was. Made in the image of God. And there was flourishing, and it was an environment of glory and honor and love and pleasure and blessing. It just couldn't have been any better. And it's in that environment that the mind was created in humanity, made in the image of God that we might flourish. When we think about entertainment, John Calvin said it this way about God's creation, that it's the theater of God's glory. I love that idea. That there was a theater in Genesis 1 and 2, the first part of God's story, before there was ever one that we had to go pay to be able to see something. The theater of God's glory, you just look at what He created and what He made, and what a beautiful theater it was early on. But there's a problem, and that problem is the fall. And this separates us from God. There was this harmony with God in mind, in image, in every way. And now in the fall, that's broken. So there's no longer a connection to God. There's a separation from God. Our minds are now corrupt. They're darkened. They're twisted. They don't see things as beautiful and excellent anymore. Instead, those things that there's a twisting and a corrupting of everything. And so the Scripture describes our minds apart from God. That's the effect, one effect of sin, is that kind of corruption, and all that's good and beautiful and true is now distorted and corrupted. In Galatians chapter 5, We see a picture of what that corruption looks like in our day-to-day. It's the same today. I want to read this. It's an ugly list, but it describes what happens because of sin and the fall of humanity. It's the kind of thing we don't want to be consuming in social media and entertainment. It's not beautiful and it's not excellent. This is a guardrail for us. Now, the deeds of the flesh are evident. The flesh here is that sinful nature that desires these things. Jesus said actually that people desired darkness more than they did light. Now, the deeds of the flesh are evident. It's evident what they are: immorality, impurity, sensuality in verse 19. That word immorality grabs up any kind of sexual immorality. Anything that's outside of God's perfect design of marriage between a man and a wife, any sexual activity outside of that relationship would be in this category of immorality, impurity, and then sensuality is the unbridled acts of indecency to shock the public. 2,000 plus years ago, there were indecent acts being done intended to shock the public. It's just now we have a wider way to shock. Idolatry, sorcery. That word sorcery comes from a Greek word, pharmakeia. That word pharmakeia is what gives us our English word pharmacy. What's behind pharmacy or pharma is drugs. And so what he says is that that's a deed of the flesh. It's sorcery. It's drugs that lead to just kind of magical or crazy thinking. Think LSD trip, and that's what sorcery would be. Enmity, strife, jealousy. Jealousy here, and I'm highlighting a few of these because I think this is what's prevalent in our social media and entertainment world that we want to steer clear of. It's not what's beautiful and good. And jealousy is the desire to be as well off as another person. And then we'll find in verse 21 the word envying. Envying is not that I'm jealous that I want to have what someone else is having, be as well off as they are. Envy is I don't want you to even have it. So those would be the two, envy and jealousy. There's outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, all kinds of division. I think we are aware of that happening. Envying, drunkenness, carousing, things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. It's really clear that as a result of our fallen nature, our brokenness, that if we continue to practice these things in Galatians 5:19 through 21, that we'll not inherit God's kingdom, that fifth and last circle. There's a difference in fighting, battling, and practicing. But we don't want to take lightly the Scripture. If we find ourselves celebrating things in this list, then we're not looking through the God biblical lens at media and entertainment. So many people today would say the problem is not what I just described. The problem is people like us are trying to suppress people from the freedom to just do whatever they want to do. And if we would quit suppressing that, then people would be good. We're actually the ones at fault because we think this is not a healthy or good thing. It's an interesting line of thinking. But that's what our culture says. And it's not just today that I could almost not speak to this from a Christian perspective and just speak to it from a cultural perspective. In a newspaper this week that I read, and I'll read a paper every once in a while, but there was an article, social media's harmful impact on teenage girls is undeniable. Teenagers themselves are blaming social media for the high rates of teenage depression. The teenagers recognize that it's the problem, one of the main problems. But then in the same breath, they say they can't stop because they don't know how to stop, and then they don't want to feel left out. It's a quandary. But the problem is not somebody saying this is not helpful. The percentages are high on the rates of depression and anxiety for teenage girls. That's the problem. The good news is there's redemption. And we can reconnect to God through what Jesus did for us on the cross. For He rescued us in Colossians 1 from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. We sang that right before I started, what He's done. He's forgiven us and given us rescue. The other day, our staff was being trained in CPR, and so we did it, and we had all these dummies there that we were working on. And if you've done CPR training, you know those dummies, they're lifeless. And the only time that you actually do CPR on somebody is if they're not breathing. And we desperately needed God to do CPR on us, to bring us back from being dead to being alive in Christ. And that's what He's done. He's made it possible through the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that we can be reconnected to God. And while our minds are darkened at the fall, when we're redeemed in Christ and we receive His rescue, now we're Jesus's. And in 1 Corinthians 2:16, we're told, now we have the mind of Christ. So the image of God that's been distorted at the fall has now been restored in Christ. Again, this is not a good way to say this necessarily in our culture today. I'll say it though. I had a seminary professor years ago said we're basically subhuman, and then when we come to know Christ, we're human again in Jesus, because the image has been restored, and included in that is our minds have been restored. Now we can see through that God lens that which is beautiful and excellent, and we can discern that in media, social media, and in entertainment. There's a redemption that happens at the cross. Internal, raise your hand. The movie, The Jesus Revolution, just came out a few weeks ago. Sometimes I'll say it. If you don't go to another movie this year, go to that one. God, you talk about beautiful and excellent in the way God uses things. I saw an interview yesterday with John Irwin, who created it, and with a team of people. And all over the country in theaters, sometimes people are staying and they're repenting and confessing sin and they're worshiping, staying at the theater. There's been baptisms reported at fountains outside the movie theaters after the movie. It's the story of the hippies and the Jesus Revolution in the early 70s. And John Irwin said something in this interview that I have just not contemplated, that gave me incredible hope for today. He said, if you think back what was happening, and some of you are in it, and you can think back to it, but you have the generation coming out of World War II, and now there's the baby boom going on, and now there's houses being bought and cars being bought, and there's this emphasis on the materialism. And then you come into the 60s, and you've got the kids coming through saying, no, this is a little bit empty. And what John Irwin said, he said they were actually on a spiritual quest. They were just finding it in the wrong spot, in the hippie and drug culture. But it was a spiritual quest. They were after something. They just didn't know what they were after. And then the Jesus Revolution took off and people met Christ, and then everything started changing for them. And that emptiness that they had, and they were trying to fill it with so many other things, now they're finding in Jesus that's actually where the satisfaction and joy and pleasure comes. This is what he said. He said, there's a difference in revival and awakening. Revival happens in a church. Awakening happens in a culture. And before there's awakening, there's chaos. I think that's happening right now. That made the most sense to me of anything I've heard. We're in pure chaos. And yet, we're hearing things all over the country with our students and college students and younger ones and older ones, not confined to that. Could it be that there's a bit of an awakening coming out of the chaos? And that when people find all the things they're hunting for in the chaos come up empty, that when they come up, they see Jesus is actually the answer they're looking for. And we have the opportunity to be able to share that with them. I don't think this is probably okay. It's not the most positive way to say it. I just couldn't come up with a better way today. So if you can just kind of roll with me. But if we really know Jesus and really have the answer to the exhaustion and the spiritual quest that people have. And we've gone silent and are not speaking about Jesus, as awkward as it might be, as uncomfortable as it could get. If we're not at least giving an offer out there of, this is really what you're after, then I just have to say, shame on us. That we would have the answer and we wouldn't be communicating that to someone, to somebody. Again, I know that's not the whole positivity vibe or whatever we're supposed to have, but I'm just saying, we have something to offer. Are we offering it? And I think that leads to our purpose. Colossians 3:2, to set our mind on Christ, not on the things that are on earth. And so we keep our minds on Him. We stay focused on Him. We take Jesus. You say, you want me to be a fanatic about Jesus? You know, I think I am. Be a hippie for God's sake. See what happens. And then in the new heavens and the new earth, behold, He says, I write all things new. And our minds will be made right. And we'll be shaped beautifully. And we'll be in the most beautiful and excellent environment that we could imagine. So if that's God's story and we think about our image being restored, our minds being restored, how does this play out practically in social media entertainment? And what I've been doing the last few weeks, I want to do again today, is to have a conversation with a couple in our church. John and Julie, if you'll go ahead and kind of make your way here. And I just want you to hear how they're doing life with their family. We have so many families in our church. I just thought this will be really helpful. I think it's helpful for grandparents. We're not suggesting this is the perfect way to do it or the only way to do it. It's a way to do it. And maybe it'll spur some ideas for you practically of how we actually live this out. But I told you originally I wanted us to anchor in Philippians 4:8, and I want to go there before we have this conversation. So finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's any excellence and anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. We're not going to suggest today that you shouldn't listen to certain kinds of music, or you shouldn't go to these movies, or you shouldn't watch this particular television series, or you shouldn't do this social media platform. What I would say is, principally, Philippians 4:8 is a great place to have a God lens so that I'm going to stuff that is excellent, worthy of praise, beautiful, lovely, good. That's my lens for what I look through. And then I can know I'm confidently looking at the kind of lens that God has. Now, many of us know verses 6 and 7 of Philippians 4. It says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And then the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your heart and your soul in Christ Jesus. In verse 8, if we stop short, then we'll end up, if we're not thinking and dwelling on the things of verse 8, then verse 7, our peace will be robbed. In verse 6, we'll be anxious again. There's a flow. Dwell on these things and we'll stable out in our minds. Don't dwell on these things, we'll be not at peace, anxious. So we think Philippians 4:8 is an anchor. So I had lunch with John several months ago, and when we had lunch, I just tucked away with him. I thought, whenever we have a conversation like this, I want our church to hear from them. One of the things I loved, and when I meet with people, John was just so complimentary of his wife. And I just love it when I'm with people and the spouse is just so complimentary of their spouse. But then we ended up talking about social media and ways they handle that in their home. And John just talked about it being it's like a full-time job for Julie to do that in their home. And it just sounded to me like they were doing it really well. So I just want us to see what kind of ideas we can glean from them today. So if you just first kind of give us a brief of your family, just kind of who you are.
We have a 16-year-old boy that's a sophomore, and a 14-year-old daughter that is in 8th grade that decided to sit on the front row for the service. And we have a 10-year-old daughter that's in 4th grade.
Perfect. Usually when I call people out on the first row, it doesn't go so well. So I hope it goes well for you at home. I love that. So tell us from just philosophically how you've kind of processed that you're going to do social media and entertainment in your home, how you're going to raise your kids with all that's around us.
It's definitely evolved as they have gotten older, and we've been in the thick of it. I think, we always had these kind of ideals of what it would look like until we got there. And I think the way we kind of explain it the best is with our kids. We've told them, even as we had a 16-year-old, we didn't give him the keys to the car and say, go have fun. We've taught him, we spent hours with him in the car, teaching him how to drive the car, the safety, all of that. And so I think we've taken that same philosophy with the phones and just really tried to, we would never be ahead of them, they're so savvy, but walk alongside them in it and help guide and teach them.
Mm-hmm. Love it. So when you think about the ways that you're teaching them, the ways you're walking with them, how have y'all had conversations with them? How does that kind of work? Like what's a real life? I could walk out of here and I would have an idea of how to do this with my child.
Daily. Oh. I don't know if this is on. Yeah, is it on? Yeah, daily. Julie is really good about engaging with the kids, having conversations, and letting them know that she's there, she's present, and not letting them just go out. But you can probably share a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's just daily conversations. We put them to bed every night, both of us individually. We go and pray with each one of them, lay down with each one of them, and I think that's when we have a lot of really just conversations of what their day looked like. We don't really ever just take, it was good. I am nosy, and I ask them a lot of questions. And so I think we just really try to make sure they know we're intentional in their lives and walking alongside them. And I think we try to constantly challenge them, too, with what's going in, what are you seeing, and how does that then walk along with your walk with the Lord. And, I ask our 16-year-old on a regular basis, when are you spending time with the Lord? What are you doing? And it's often, he's like, I go to baseball early and I'll sit in my car. And I think just even at their age, encouraging them that time one-on-one with the Lord then also convicts their thoughts and what they do, and having them to also be an ownership in the social media, because it's not going away, and I don't want them at 18 for the first time ever trying to figure it out. And so for us, it's really just walking alongside the good, the bad, and just being intentional in our conversations and bringing it back to, is that uplifting? Is that wholesome? Mm-hmm. Is that of the Lord?
Mm-hmm. Love it. What are positive things that you see in social media entertainment? One thing we've kind of talked about, what's beautiful, what's excellent, what are things that are actually good in it and about it?
I'm encouraged when, Trevor has put out his TikToks, and it's called Trevor's Faith, and it's had a positive impact on a lot of people's lives, and we often don't even know what those impacts are until potentially years down the road when somebody shares with you. But he will at times have people that will let him know, whether it's his friends in school or sometimes even it's some other adults that have seen his TikToks, and they're encouraged by them. So that's a positive aspect that we've seen play out. But of course, there's a lot of still being very careful and monitoring, because it's a very tough, ruthless world out there, and the world can turn on you really quickly, and so you still have to be very careful in the midst of all that.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about, we've talked about it, when you discovered he was looking at TikTok, kind of how that played out.
Yeah, John was out of town, and I always kind of just been no to social media. And I went up into his room, and he had his Bible open, And at the moment, I think he'd shared with me that he had, I knew he had a TikTok account, but it was all private, and that he had a public account on TikTok, to which I was like, absolutely not. And then I think probably it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, I got woken up by the Lord and just really convicted in my own heart was that I really just took that control of myself and didn't even ask him, like, you're reading your Bible. And so I called John, and he was out of town and actually was with a friend that's a pastor and just spent time with him, kind of also getting advice. And, when we kind of broke it down with Trevor, he was actually following TikTokers that were sharing the gospel. And there was a specific guy that was in high school that he was really bold about his faith. And he was answering a lot of questions, too, in his TikToks about, what is my faith and what is it different from different religions, Muslims, everything else, and things that I think as a parent, probably early on, would have scared me away. But realizing they have to be so solid in their faith, and sometimes that's asking the questions. And it's, through TikTok, it was seeing this guy who really helped him grow in his faith and encouraged him to read his Bible and share his faith on TikTok. And I feel like had we just shut him down, I think that was what was at the moment encouraging him to be in his word.
Let's think about other things that are positive uses. So Lauren Rose is in here in this service, and she does all of our communications, social media, and does a fantastic job with it. Another really positive use of it, and it's beautiful and excellent, we've just gotten in the prisons with an app called Pando, and last week was our first time to have, and all that's going are sermons from the Sundays. So last week was the first one, and she just told me we had 663 subscribers in the first week. And so that's an excellent use of social media. How can we get the word the way Trevor's doing it, the way Lauren's leading us in different ways to do it? There's great uses for work. In your work, it doesn't always have to be a spiritual component, although there's a spiritual component to our work, but there's all kinds of things that are good out there and good uses of what we're doing and what we have. Let's talk about time. So we can be looking at all good things, and there can be a time consumption that could actually end up being the sin in the deal, not even what they're looking at necessarily. So how do y'all manage the time for your kids? And I haven't asked you this all morning, but how do y'all manage it yourselves? We need to be fair we can't just be saying this is what kids do without asking ourselves what is it that we're doing.
Definitely, in managing our kids' time is convicting on my own time and just mindlessly scrolling through. I think sometimes we probably do it better than other times, like spring break and when they're out of school. It's probably not managed as well, but we do try to have, there's an app that I have on my phone that kind of controls their cell phones and just the time, and we can pause it and shut it down if they're not being respectful or being teenage children. And then I think, the thing that we've also just know is, although those apps are on there to help, you can block certain apps and websites. Once they have a certain app like Instagram or Snapchat, you cannot monitor it unless you just physically go on their phone, which our kids know that at any point in time, I will go through their phones. We always tell them that there are phones, they get to borrow them. And so there's really that's just how it works in our house in managing that. But as I've gotten a little bit older, we tried to give them a little bit of that responsibility. And I can always see, on my phone, like how much time they're in certain things. And I think different times in their lives, they both have been convicted of different. At one point, one of them completely felt they needed to fast from social media altogether. And, I think that they kind of like the responsibility of taking that time, and so we'll look at it, and if they're managing it well, then we kind of let them. I don't know that we have a set time on it. I think it does come out in their attitudes and how they are at home, and you can kind of see it when there's too much, you kind of know.
Yeah, and it always amazes me too when the kids have talked about going to camp or weekends away or whatever it is. and they and their friends all put their phones down and get away from it, how much they actually enjoy it and they want to. It is how they all communicate, as we all know today. But they even recognize themselves just, putting it away. And it's funny because we'll have times where we or even other parents are looking for the kids and like, why aren't they answering their phone? Why aren't they their phone? Or where are they? Well, it's exciting when we find out that they've actually all just put their phones down and they've stepped away from it. And they seem to just sometimes be more just kids, and just have fun and be creative and play. And we appreciate that. So we encourage that as well.
Like it. One thing on the time that I've heard, I've had a number of conversations around this to just try and figure out how it can be the best help. But one observation that's being made with the younger children, I'm sure it's everybody, but just more and more it seems different coming up, that the devices are like a babysitter. Small children are on their parents' phones, at restaurants and other places like that. They're on screens at home. They're on screens at work or at school. They're on screens in the car. It's just an overstimulation that is playing itself out in the way even they respond to authority with it. Lisa and I walk around our neighborhood a lot, and the other day there's this one family that they're outside all the time. And as I was saying about this, I thought, I love what they're doing because they're doing chalk art outside. They have like a preschooler, and then it looks like an elementary age, and then maybe one in between. But they're just outside all the time. And I thought, I love that because they're not using screens as a babysitter. They're engaging with their kids outside, face-to-face with them. So I think on a time side, in Ephesians 5:15 and 16, we're told to make the most use of our time and to be careful with it because the days are evil. And so we want to make the most of our days. A young couple I met with the other day, a young married couple, one thing they do, they have 15 minutes a day that they allow each other to use social media. And then they have passcodes on it, so they can't go over the 15 minutes. And the partner has the passcode. So there's no way, if you get more social media time, you have to ask your spouse if you can get more social media time. I thought that was a neat rhythm. And then they've mentioned it, I just want to highlight it. If we can't get a rhythm of time alone with God and time in small group community and time in worship, if we can't seem to make that rhythm happen, but we can consume all kinds of social media, I think that's a good check on the time. And I love how Julie said it. If I'm spending substantive time with the Lord in those different kinds of environments, then that's going to give me the right lens to look at whatever social media or entertainment I'm consuming. And so I think that time piece is a big deal. Sometimes this happens in families where kids will say, yeah, but my friend's parents do it this way. How do you respond to that?
They have never said that. No, I'm just kidding. We hear it all the time. Because we still approve apps, even for our oldest. We kind of filter all that through. So they'll be at school and get an app. I'm like, I am the only one that has to have this approved. But our comeback is always like, I am not raising anyone but you. I don't care what they do. We are responsible for you and who you become. And so that's kind of our thing. I think we hear it less now, just because we've always had the same answer. So I think they've caught on a little bit. But yeah, that's just kind of our answer.
Yeah, I love that. Anything else that's a safeguard and accountability, other than things we might have already said?
Yeah, we have in our home what's called Disney Circle and also Disney Go. There's lots of different options out there. We've just now had that for a number of years. And what we like about it is it helps control. It's a tool that just helps gain some control in the home, And then the Disney Go is actually on their cell phone, so they could be anywhere in the entire world, and we could literally shut it down. We could see where they are. We can, control their devices. And Julie does a great job about monitoring all of that daily. And we joke around because late at night, after they get to bed, and they know this, but they get to bed. She's always checking out. Okay, what are they looking at? What are the communications that are going on? We don't just let them, have these phones and these devices, whether they're at home or out in the world, and just run free with it. So I appreciate that it's a big commitment, and she's often quite exhausted because she's up late and she's always checking on them. But we have a small window of time that we have this opportunity with them to help guide, shape, and lead their lives, and so we take that very seriously.
So we're talking about content of what they're watching. You're checking what that content is. Just scripture that you can anchor yourselves to, I think, to look in the God lens, is 1 John 2:15. It says, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." If we love the worldly things about what we do on our devices and in entertainment, that's a concern of the heart in the scriptures. So that's evidence probably of really what's going on in the heart by the content we're consuming. And then Romans 12:2, which we read earlier, says not to be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that word conform means to be squeezed into the mold of. And we know, I don't think we have to talk too much about it, because most of us have the experience of knowing we talk and then all of a sudden our phone is giving us back advertisements of exactly what we were talking about, which is actually a good accountability. I was thinking about it this week. It's good accountability because if you realize, gosh, anything you talk about near your device, somebody on the other side, however this works, is listening because all of a sudden I get bombarded with ads about that very thing I just spoke of. Now, some of you understand that world. You know exactly what's happening and why. I just know it's happening. That's sufficient for me to know that people smarter than I am have figured out how to market me, figure me out, know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, when I need more of it, and so forth. And it's trying to shape me. And so I want to have the edge of not letting it shape me, but I want to shape what it is that I'm listening to and consuming. So I want that mind being transformed, and that comes by spending time with God and His Word and the things that we've described. Proverbs 13:20 says, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm." I actually think that's a great verse for social media. We can walk with wise people in that realm, and we'll be wise. Or we can walk with foolish people, and we'll be the fool. But content, we've talked a lot about different things, but content is one thing, time is one thing, but really the bottom line is the heart of a person. So help me think about how y'all kind of parent the heart of your kids.
I think we really try to focus in on the why, not necessarily the rule, but why do we follow it, and what does the Bible say about our choices? Because I feel like, especially social media with kids, it's geared to be sneaky, it's geared to be secretive, which is so opposite of what we are intentional with in our family. And so we had that conversation, with having Snapchat. I'm saying it's okay for you to have a conversation that disappears. And, so I think for us, it's just been a lot of those conversations and really trying to shepherd and walk along with their heart and their choices. And I think that we've tried not to just say no, but let's sit down and let's talk about why. Here's why our answer is what it is. I feel like if they have the reason why, it's better for them to see it versus just told no without any input to it.
Mm-hmm. And then things they've talked about, I think when we're parenting the heart and talking about the why, that's when we can actually when we talk about God's story and who God is, that's an opportunity to bring who God is And that's a big piece of the why, to put the scripture on top of the why. In Proverbs 4:23, it says, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. We parent and we watch our own hearts because that's where life flows, from the depths of our heart. Our heart contains the way we think, the way we act, the way we feel, and our motivations. It's all of it. So when we're talking about our hearts, we're talking with someone about what are they thinking? We're talking about what are the motivations going on in there? What are the emotions that are happening in there? And what are the actions that are following? This book, I've tried to give you resources over these weeks. It's called Worldliness by C.J. Mahaney. And he has great questions, the different writers of the chapters, to help wrestle through. I think that's really helpful. The one thing he talks about, the heart, when we're going to social media or entertainment kind of options, are we going to it as an escape? Is it to escape from something? And I know for me that if I'm having trouble with something, oftentimes I'll just find myself scrolling mindlessly through the sports one more time. It's just not the place where I'm actually going to really get any help. So do I go mindlessly? Is there some secret sin that we have, and that's why we watch something, or that's why we listen to something, or that's why we go to something? Is it just mindless and lazy? So what's our motivation? And then I would say that just like Trevor has been an influencer and a creator of content on social media, there's so many of you that can create content well and can be an influence in a really beautiful and excellent way. The caution I would say to that, I heard somebody years ago say, when we have worship leaders, for example, that are the real big name worship leaders, and they're on a stage leading 20,000 or 30,000 people, there's not very many people that can bear the weight of leading that many people without there being a danger of pride and everything else that can go with being in front of a lot of people like that. It is a big weight to bear. And I would say that about social media influencing, or in the arts, theater, whatever people are in. We want to make sure that our character matches the assignment that we're given. And one of the things I love that they're doing with Trevor, they've walked it with him as a middle schooler and a high schooler out in that world, making sure that things that are going on, his character is right there with what he's doing. And I think that's a good ring of counselors around us to know, do we have the character to match what it is that we're out there influencing and creating? I think that can be a safeguard. So the last thing for this conversation I would ask is, so you're a mom and you go at it 24/7 as a mom. For a number of people, they're working. Both parents are working. For others, they're single and they're working and really wouldn't even have an option not to work. If this is a full-time job to do what you're saying on social media, how would you cheer on somebody that's working or a single parent?
Well, I think the biggest is obviously just so much prayer and discernment. Back when our kids were little, had someone who I just was a mentor. And I think the thing that always stuck with me that she had said was, it's really important as your kids get older to pray for God to open your eyes to what you need to see and not be distracted by what's not important. And as they're older, it definitely resonates with me, and just there's so much to tackle. And so just praying for constant just wisdom for what is the character and integrity and what we need to make sure that we're addressing. But I also think the other one is just this church is such a huge community. And I mean, we have other people in this church who pour into our kids and who disciple them and share with them in ways that we might say the same thing, but it does not have the weight that someone else does. And so I think it's just having other people around them that are like-minded that can help through. I always say it takes a village to raise them. And just having people intentional, checking in with them, accountability, praying for them, and helping to shape and mold them.
Super. All right, so we've been thinking about how do we have that God-centered lens on social media and entertainment, so we have the right worldview that's healthy. I want to give you just a couple, three other resources, and there's a gentleman in our church that is helped on this particular one, and I want to introduce you to it today. It's newer out there. I think it's a phenomenal resource in helping with our kids, and I think it would be helpful for ourselves, candidly. But it's called Darkroom Faith. And I want you to see the trailer on it just to get you an idea of the excellence in the way it's made. 'Cause I think it just really resonates. And this is another great use of how we use media to actually be a help to each other. So if we could look at that trailer. Thank you. That's awesome.
It's probably a year ago when I saw that video. It's called My Deconversion from Christianity. Before I could fully process what that even meant, it started autoplay.
There was this one girl, she doesn't share the same views as me, and she tells me,
I really don't like Christians. Why is Christianity the only thing? Don't all religions lead to God? Faith is just a personal thing.
lately I've been asking myself what makes Christianity different. Why do I identify as a Christian?
If there really is a God who really does love me, how come I feel this way?
When I was younger, kids bullied me because of who I am. So I gave up on God. If he was gonna allow all that, who needs him?
But when I was 14, my friend Hannah forwarded me this video. It was a story about a girl just like me. I just want God to tell me if this is supposed to be what I'm supposed to do. If this is my purpose, please, show me. What was the fight about? Tell me that story.
Just tonight, a guy tries to kiss me without asking. Are you kidding me? You have to ask me, don't just kiss me. That's messed up.
What? Oh, you think I'm gonna tell you my backstory? Maybe later.
I grew up trusting in the Bible, but as I've gotten older, I think I've started to wonder how the Bible and my experiences can hold up together.
I don't hate church, but I don't feel it either.
I tried reading the Bible last week. I didn't get much out of it, to be honest.
When I ask why, is that offensive? Am I a bad Christian?
I have a secret. All my life,
I've had questions about my faith.
About God and about religion.
but now
I'm gonna tell you my questions.
My struggles.
My doubts.
I hope you can handle
The truth.
I just think that is incredibly well done. And the topics that are out there on that website are just right where we are as a culture. It moves from things like that, then to there's more kind of videos, and there's multiple ways that you can attack a particular struggle or challenge that someone's having that'll help get someone back inside that biblical worldview, the way that God sees. And then we can move out of the dark into the light. Jermaine and Courtney, they recommend the Culture Translator. We've talked about that often. It's a weekly thing that comes out. It's keeping up with all the social media. Look, my sons are 27 and 30 years old, and they'll tell you today they can't keep up with the 15 and 16-year-olds with how fast things change and all the things that are out there. And this Culture Translator is really helpful to keep up, and it helps bring questions that you can have with your kids around things that are going on. And so those are a couple of things that can be a help. I mentioned the book. And then I want to close it with this. I go to a gym that sends out a magazine once a month. And one thing I've noticed in our culture that I think has happened is it wants to get rid of God. And yet what's swinging back around are God's ideas minus God. And when I read this magazine, that's what I see again and again, is things that are actually God's ideas, that God is out of it now, and it's like we've come up with it as humans. And so it's an interesting thing to watch play out. But what this guy suggested, I think, is a great suggestion for us to think about how we can see the beautiful and excellent things is to do a 30-day great digital declutter. It's a professor of computer science. He does this with his class, and he suggests a 30-day reset so that you actually, he wouldn't frame it this way, I would, so that you can actually be about the beautiful and excellent things that are out there in social media and entertainment. And so it's a 30-day fast. I had a friend years ago, he would fast quite often, 30 days on different things in his life to make sure he had control of it and it did not have control of him. So he would fast from wine for 30 days because he wanted to know, does it have me or do I have it? And if we're afraid to fast from something for 30 days, that probably says something about our own hearts and where we are. We want to make sure something doesn't get hold of us. We want to be able to consume things that we want to selectively consume. We don't want to be the ones consumed by everything that's out there. And so his suggestion for a digital declutter, he said it's a jarring reset, and it's like a detox the first several days. And then it starts to get better, and you start to replace what you were doing with all your social media and entertainment intake with different things. One girl, for example, read 8 books over the course of 30 days. She would have never touched the books. Somebody else, they organized her wardrobe, actually had people over for dinner, had face-to-face conversations with people. Just replace it. At the end of the 30 days, come back and say, what do I want to reintroduce? Or what are the time frames I want to I may want to keep Instagram, but I'm just going to look at it on Saturdays and catch up, and I'm only going to have my most meaningful friends and family on it. And you just come back and reset. And I don't know that's not a bad idea for us to be able to figure out what actually is beautiful and excellent by God's standard and His lens so that it can be a beautiful and excellent thing for me. Father, thank you for our time today, and we're just incredibly grateful for your word, your guidance. We want to be the people that have integrity in our heart and that we have no worthless or evil thing before our eyes in our homes. So God, I pray that we will be obedient to whatever you're prompting us to today. And Lord, that we would have that biblical, God-centered lens on every aspect of life. Help us, God, submit it to you and then follow your lead on it. And I pray in Jesus' name. If we could, maybe just a minute or two to be quiet and solidify any things God might be speaking to you on this day.